The Russian threat will persist for many years. The focus for 2032 is on how to defend NATO territory from the Russians. This was stated by Secretary General of NATO Mark Rutte before the start of the North Atlantic Council meeting at the foreign ministers level on April 3rd. In his speech, he assured that the US remains a reliable ally within NATO. Washington has no plans to withdraw its military contingent from Europe. However, the United States has interest in other parts of the world, Mark Rutte noted.
For many years, the Americans have told us, and they started 15 years ago, that they want to pivot more towards Asia, that there are issues in the Indo-Pacific the Americans have to attend to. That's one. Second, they have for many years told the Europeans, you have to spend more. And this really started to happen after Trump came into office in 2016, 2017. There are no plans for them to all of a sudden draw down their presence here in Europe, as I said yesterday.
I think there are tensions internally within NATO. There are worries and concerns what Americans' position might be, how it could shift from one day to the next.
The United States is more active in NATO than even before, said U.S. Secretary of State. Marco Rubio called the question of whether Donald Trump would defend NATO allies in case of need hysteria and demanded that NATO member countries increase their defense spending to 5% of GDP.
The United States President Trump's made clear he supports NATO. We're going to remain in NATO. In order for us to prove, and in order for us to build the kind of NATO that has the capability. The events of the last few years, a full-scale ground war in the heart of Europe, is a reminder that hard power is still necessary as a deterrent. And so we do want to leave here with an understanding that we are on a pathway, a realistic pathway, to every single one of the members committing and fulfilling a promise to reach up to 5% of spending. That includes the United States will have to increase its percentage.
Currently, U.S. defense spending stands at 3.5%. The target for NATO members is currently 2%. Poland is the first NATO member to plan spending 4.7% of GDP on defense in 2025, said the Ministry of Defense of Poland.
We will continue along this path. 5% is definitely the goal we want to achieve next year. We are getting closer and closer to 5%. And even thanks to the long-term contracts we've signed, we will have to maintain a high level of spending for many years to come.
NATO will increase defense spending to strengthen security in Europe in response to threats from Russia, according to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Germany.
Russia threatens peace and security every day and every night on both sides of the Atlantic. That is why we, as NATO partners, will continue to expand the European security pillar as a whole. 800 billion euros over 4 years will strengthen our own security, because it is clear that the threat posed by Putin's Russia is a threat to all of us.
Meanwhile, in France, there is concern that the new 20% tariffs on all imports from the European Union, announced by US President Donald Trump, will harm the economies of NATO member states.
Solidarity, as I have already said, is unwaveringly required from all members of the alliance. Solidarity that is, however, being tested by the decisions made by President Trump regarding the imposition of reciprocal tariffs, which will have negative consequences both for the American economy and for the economies of all NATO members.
As reported by Politica, key discussions about NATO's future will take place on April 10th with the participation of defense ministers from member states. Then, in June, NATO heads of state will meet in The Hague. Reported by Alexandra Zaslavec, Kristina Dombrovskaya, UATV News. The President of France called on allies to make strategic decisions to defend Europe. He also proposed introducing joint European funding to increase arms purchases and production. Emmanuel Macron is convinced that it will be difficult for Europe to have a unified army. However, he believes it is possible to create shared defense capabilities. Otherwise, he argues, Europe will not be able to become more autonomous.
As Europeans, we must increase our military efforts. We, the French, have a strong army, the most effective in Europe. We will need to strengthen our defense and our security. In the coming weeks, I want to organize a large-scale European funding initiative to increase defense procurement and production.
France must also increase its defense budget share, President Macron is convinced. During a meeting with parliamentary factions and groups, he suggested that the National Assembly, the country's parliament, consider increasing defense spending to 5% of gross domestic product. He reminded them that in the 60s, 70s and 80s, during the Cold War, France had similar levels of defense spending. However, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, investments were reduced. Today, France spends about 2% of its gross domestic product on defense.
The time is coming when we will have to invest even more, both in France and across Europe, to strengthen our defense and security. I'm not sure if 5% is the right figure for France, but in any case, we will have to raise these expenses. I do not rule out launching a savings mechanism. We are entering an era where each of us should ask ourselves, what can we do for the French nation and the Republic? In this sense, such a savings mechanism would be a very good idea.
In recent days, Emmanuel Macron has had numerous conversations with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. The two leaders have coordinated their diplomatic efforts for the immediate future.
During the conversation, the presidents of Ukraine and France shared details of their contacts with other world leaders and coordinated positions, joint plans, and next steps. Volodymyr Zelensky and Emmanuel Macron also discussed in detail the views on security guarantees. From a publication on the website of the Office of the President of Ukraine,
in particular, the leaders discussed preparations for Emmanuel Macron's visit to Washington. According to the French president, he intends to meet with Donald Trump and urge him to be weak in the face of Putin, as this is not in Washington's interest. How can you be authoritative in the face of China then? Macron asked.
Macron, will come to the United States to speak for the Europeans and to say that Ukraine's future cannot be decided without them. Benjamin Haddad, the Minister for Europe and Foreign Affairs of France, from a publication in Le Figaro.
The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Keir Starmer, is also preparing to visit Washington. Information about the upcoming visits of Macron and Starmer was confirmed by the White House. They stated that the leaders of France and the UK would visit the United States separately, and the dates for their visits have been set.
And next Monday, the President will host France's President Emmanuel Macron. And on Thursday, the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer will visit the White House as well.
According to The Telegraph, the Prime Minister of the UK will urge Donald Trump to keep American fighter jets and missiles ready in Europe in case Russia violates the terms of any potential ceasefire. Additionally, Starmer is expected to bring the United States a strategy for deploying European troops in Ukraine.
Sir Keir Starmer will present Donald Trump with a plan to send fewer than 30,000 European troops to Ukraine in an attempt to secure American protection for the deployment. The Prime Minister is expected to detail how European forces could police any ceasefire deal brokered by the U.S. President when the pair meet in Washington next week. From a publication in The Telegraph.
The question of a peacekeeping mission in Ukraine is also being considered in Paris. According to Emmanuel Macron, France would likely be willing to send troops to guarantee peace only if it's achieved through negotiations. Reported by Alexandra Zaslavets, Valeria Nikipelova, UATV News.